I do indeed.
Okay. Did you want to have any opening thoughts about this?
Opening thoughts. Well, we chatted on Sunday, didn't we, about the Labour manifesto more, because the Tories one had just come out. And it seems quite a lot of things have happened since Sunday. So Tory manifesto has been released and dissected, and it seems quite lightweight on most things. It seems to really focus on Brexit and not really want to make any howlers, and just kind of business as usual. We're going to get Brexit done, as it says quite nicely here on the screen, and doesn't go into much detail on other things. I think the IFS said that it was, sort of very weak on policy, less than one budget's worth. What else has happened? Jeremy Corbyn sort of got eviscerated by Andrew Neil.
That was excellent.
I did enjoy it. Kind of had to admit that taxes are going to go up for some groups below that 80,000 threshold. And they've brought out this bizarre, to my mind, and probably to yours, I don't know, I'll let you have your thoughts on it, this bizarre race and faith manifesto, where they basically say they're going to put an end to all racist thought in this country. I don't know how they're going to do that. And basically get equality of outcomes for everyone, which I think is both impossible and undesirable, but they're going to have a go at it. I think Corbyn says he's going to compel everyone to learn about colonialism as well. So I don't know. I guess it's good for people to learn about history, really important for people to know about history, but I think we all know with that it's more making people feel bad about themselves. And
when I visited Hong Kong, what would it be, 4 years ago now, it was, I must say, it was a little bit enlightening to find out about the history with Britain's colonialism, because that's just something you don't learn about in school. I mean, it wasn't like a really big thing, but for people in Hong Kong, it really was a big thing. Obviously, it's like they used to be part of the British Empire, and then we just gave it back, and there was opium wars, and there was all sorts of stuff going on there that it's just not possible to teach everything in schools, right? So we learn a lot about the Tudors, the Victorians, Second World War, First World War, things that we consider to be really important. And there's just a lot of this stuff that falls through the gaps. And it's an interesting conversation to talk about, like, what are the most important things to teach kids about Britain? Is it the things that make us look good, the things that make us look bad, sort of a mix of both? Or
I think it's important to have a mix of both. I mean, I don't think knowledge is the problem. I wouldn't mind this thing being taught. I think it's very important. I think we did a lot of things wrong, as well as doing some things right in the past. Well, a lot of things right in the past as well. But I think the problem here is that people realize why it's being done, probably to bash down on the country, and
there's an agenda.
Yeah, there's an agenda, and it's probably a precursor to pushing this equality of outcomes, and saying that any discrepancies nowadays are a legacy of this horrible colonialist past that still has its tendrils in modern society. And I think that's where people think, hang on a minute here. If some schools want to teach it and they think it's valuable, good. But Jeremy Corbyn top down compelling everyone to do it. Usually things we compel are things like skills, maths, English, things we'll need in everyday life. And he's putting it on a par with those, which, it's one way of looking at things, but I'm not sure it really is. So
that's a pretty good segue into my first point that I wrote down about this Conservative manifesto, which is that I was pleasantly surprised by how kind of pro-Britain it is, just in stark contrast to the Labour manifesto that we read, like you said, a few days ago. It's easy to draw these comparisons where there's this obviously pro-Brexit speech in there, but then there's also this sort of underlying theme of Britain is good, like this is a good country, like we've got to make this the best we can. I mean, he doesn't say make Britain great again, but he's pretty close to saying that. That's the kind of feel of it, is just don't feel embarrassed about being British. It's a great thing to be, and it's a great country. And that was, I found that a bit heartening. It warmed my cockles.
Warmed your cockles, yeah.
Just a little.
I think I mean, let's be honest, right? It's become a sort of trope of sort of left-leaning thing, particularly the hard left, of which Jeremy Corbyn is a member of, have been quite anti-Britain, to thinking, again, it comes back to this teaching people about colonialism. We've done all these horrible things and we're not necessarily a force for good. I think in his interview with Andrew Neil the other day, he wanted to focus more on, when we were getting attacked by terrorists, he wants to say, well, why have we caused this? What's our role in this? We need to think more about this. And we do need to think about that. Of course, we need to think when we intervene in other countries. But I think it's very much the emphasis of Jeremy Corbyn that he's quite negative on the country. There are some things to be negative about. Obviously, he wants to improve things, throw a lot of money at things. But like you say, I think to a lot of Brits, it's very disheartening just to be told you're a piece of, shit all the time.
Yeah. Well, there's this guy who I work with. Obviously, I'm not working at the moment, but there's this guy I work with who I consider to be my finger on the pulse. He's the guy that I think about when I'm trying to think about what is like the British perspective on this. He's kind of a middle of the road political guy, and he was saying that he'd never vote for Jeremy Corbyn for exactly that reason. But he was saying that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't like this country. He's always on the side of our enemies, basically, and he has no national pride whatsoever. And I hope that that's reflected in a lot of British people who just want to, that they're not ashamed of being British, and they don't want to be, and they don't want their children to be either.
I don't think you need this sense of self-loathing and reaching back into the horrible things that I've done in the past and constantly saying sorry to realize that there's some problems going forward that need solving. Yeah. I'm not sure the two are necessary. And I think as I sort of said earlier, I think it's just a precursor to this equalities of outcome agenda. This was always wrong from minute one, and it's not really ever got better. So, now government has to step into every aspect of your life and do it for you. I think that's the problem here.
Well, I want to keep focused because there's a lot to talk about here, and I don't want to get too hung up on Labour.
No, we did that. We did them at the weekend, so let's stick on the Tories.
Yeah, so there's definitely. I was expecting that the Tory manifesto would be Labour light, like there'd be the same themes but less spending, less borrowing, less free stuff. But it would be like the same kind of flavour but toned down. Which is why I was surprised and pleasantly surprised to see that there was a different flavour. And like you said, it's not a very strong conviction. It's not a far right or even a extreme libertarian manifesto. It's quite milk toast, as they say. It's quite vanilla. Nothing that's really repugnant in there. But it is vaguely pro business and pro Britain.
The way I saw it described was something to get a job done, right? So it was to have no massive gaffes, not put your foot in your mouth. Yeah. I remember Theresa May at the 2017 election. There was some policy in there about cutting elderly care, or was it care for dementia patients or something, and it became a whole big scandal. These in-depth policies that got pulled apart. And I think Boris has tried to avoid that with, he doesn't want any big gaffes. He doesn't want anything sort of that's going to distract from the main idea, which is let's keep this on Brexit. Because I think if it goes away from Brexit and it goes on to NHS funding and social care funding and this kind of thing, that's obviously a stronger Labour case. So I think he's decided to stay away from that and say, look, Britain, Brexit business, and leave himself some wiggle room after Brexit to go various directions. Yeah,
I think it's interesting that they did put some free stuff in the as we talked about before, it's stuff that old people like. So they brought back the free BBC TV license for for pensioners, and they've kept it in. There was one line that I noticed about the fuel allowance, the winter fuel for old people, so they don't get a cold house. and it is conspicuous that the elderly are the most reliable voters, and they're especially the most reliable Conservative voters. So they had to keep in, this emphasis on the NHS, which of course old people love because they're always going to their GP and going to the hospital. I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. They just, they don't have the same health that young people have, and like I said, they riding the bus and things like that.
Well, what comes through in both of these manifestos, as you said, there's definitely an age divide, right? So Labour talking about giving 16-year-olds the vote, talking about this is a manifesto of hope for the future. The demographics say that younger people vote Labour, older people are more conservative. So you can understand, you can see the sort of workings, the man behind the curtain, very much in some of the policies that are espoused in the two manifestos, and there's definitely an age discrepancy, as you'd expect.
Yeah, there is some stuff for young people, though. I'd like to point out in the Conservative Manifesto does have, especially the environmentalist stuff. I always consider environmentalism to be sort of a young person thing, just because young people, this is the world they're going to grow into, that their children are going to be born into. So, and it's also just a kind of it just tends to be young people who care about the environment, not exclusively, but that's my feeling at least. And they have some stuff in there about the just like, again, not as extreme as Labour, but they're playing lip service to it. They're phasing out the diesel and petrol cars and carbon neutral by 2050,
which I think is what was the IPCC suggestion was sort of at least 2050, wasn't it? So this is potentially a goal that balances that conflict between economics and we all want a clean environment. People are worried about the climate. We want to breathe clean air. We want to move towards these cleaner technologies. So it's a sort of pro-business, pro-economy, balanced position, if you will, which is Labour and Lib Dem light on this issue. But perhaps more practical and more attainable. And
they're pro-nuclear as well. So if they're serious about carbon, then I think it would be great to. That's right. I forgot you could see my screen now. I was listening. I promise. It would be great if they really put their foot down and started building more nuclear reactors. I think that's something that might actually help us to get to that 2050 target.
Well, I mean, it's been mentioned a lot, hasn't it? I think if you're saying the world's going to end in 12 years, and yet you're saying nuclear and fracking are off the table, you're not a serious person as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I was going to bring up fracking when we talked about the Labour Manifesto, because I thought it was interesting. They've said that they Conservatives will allow fracking, but only if it's proven safe. Which is, I guess we'll see if it is proven safe or not. But I think it's something that a lot of people who are pro-environment, anti-carbon, don't know, is that fracking is lower carbon than coal and crude oil. It's the main reason why America has lowered its emissions. I don't know if that's absolute emissions or emissions per capita, but they have, since America has started fracking, they've actually done a really good job lowering their carbon, despite the fact that they aren't in the what's called the Kyoto deal, or they didn't commit to a target, and yet they managed. Like one of the big, in terms of cutting their emissions, they've done really well by global standards, and it's all because of fracking. It's not because of solar or wind or even nuclear. It's just that fracking is low carbon. It's not zero carbon, which is why the environmentalists don't like it, and these tiny earthquakes that people get upset about.
So I was looking into a little bit of this. What you say is correct in the US context. In the UK, we don't actually use much coal anymore. It's a very small amount, but there's still potentially a benefit to fracking for that gas and using gas instead. But we could get the gas from elsewhere. But another big benefit is obviously energy security. So and jobs, I guess. So why not produce the gas ourselves rather than getting it from Russia, for example? So even if there's not a CO2 benefit over potentially buying it from elsewhere, there are other benefits of doing this, for the economy, for energy security. And I looked at the issues around the safety. I think I mentioned it to you at the weekend. People were saying, "Oh, there's earthquakes and blah blah blah." Yes, there are, but the Richter scale or whatever scale they were using is pretty much logarithmic. So you see these quakes at a level of 3, and 4, 5 is sort of the threshold for any sort of damage being done. And people, oh God, 3, we're nearly at 4, 5. Really, you're order of 10, 100 away from any possibility of doing any damage. And I think the safety thing is overplayed. It's really, are we taking focus away too much from pushing for renewables, pushing for research into more efficient and lower price renewables, and taking that focus away? For me, fracking seems like, well, we need fossil fuels to back up those renewables, seems like a reasonable way to go.
Yeah, well, I think I think you're absolutely right, and it's that's why I was encouraged by the fact that they managed. They said if it can be proven safe, which to somebody who hates fracking, somebody who hates it is going to think, oh well, it's not going to be proven safe, so we're all good. And people like you and I who think it is safe are optimistic about it. So it's one of those great policies they can promise in the manifesto that pleases both groups, because they were encouraged.
There's a lot of in these and fracking's easier in America, right? Because you can go off to somewhere in the wilds and do it away from where anyone lives. There's one guy in a cabin with a dog. But
it's easier in America than the UK for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas here it's in the close to Lancaster or whatever. I think one of the big fracking sites is. Anyway, regarding the language and pleasing both sides, you're exactly right. And I think that's the sort of art in these manifestos, isn't it? Of they say we've put a moratorium on fracking, but we're listening to local communities. It's and we won't support it unless it's proved safe. We might not do it. And as you say, if you want to sort of Rorschach test yourself and say fall on what side you want and vote Tory, you can see that as saying we're banning it or we're going to go ahead with it. You can they've left the door open. Let's put it that way. Yeah,
and just switching gears, I'm just looking at what I've got written down that I noticed is did you see in the intro that Boris Johnson apparently wrote? It's got his name on it anyway. They've in the anti-EU stuff. I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about this VAT on tampons that is kind of relevant. It's one of those things that lefties never bring up about the EU, but if you know the story behind this, a few years ago, back when I think it was Cameron was the Prime Minister, the UK went to the EU and asked if we could please remove VAT from sanitary products, because women in the UK were asking for it. They were saying, well, it's ridiculous that these are being taxed as a luxury good when all women have this. Well, not all, obviously, but it's something that women.
Be careful with your language nowadays, Po.
Well, I'm saying that women in their menopause or young girls.
Men have periods too, isn't this the push anyway? Yes.
Yeah. So it's something that is quite left wing in flavour. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that word flavour. Taking the VAT off tampons, stop it being taxed as a luxury good. And it's an EU regulation, and the UK wanted to change it. They were the government, the Conservative government, was on board with removing the VAT, but the EU won't let us. And it's kind of the core of the EU regulation trap that we're in, that a lot of Remainers don't seem to believe in. They don't believe in the idea of sovereignty, or they say, "Oh, don't be ridiculous." That it's a we still have sovereignty even in the EU, but we couldn't even do this one very menial thing, which is to remove the VAT or to cut the VAT on tampons.
Yeah,
it's just sort of like a really silly policy, and I think it's fun. It's like one of those, Remainers don't want you to know this.
But it certainly is, like you said, it's become a bit of a left-leaning talking point, hasn't it? This issue of period poverty, I've seen mentioned a lot, which. I'm sympathetic to it. If women have to buy these products, men don't have to buy these products.
Yeah, they're really not very expensive, to be honest.
I was just going to say, but when I look online, it's you can get them for £1 or something. It doesn't seem like a massive issue, but as you say, it's an essential product. So Why should it not be brought into line with other essential products?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know everybody
I'm a bit out of my depth as well, you know.
If you're interested in why it is taxed as luxury product, despite the fact it's essential, is that you can get reusable. I won't go into the details, but there's moon cup is a reusable thing. That is the non-luxury version of dealing with your period is a reusable product. So that's why the disposable is considered luxury by the EU, is because there is this sort of cheaper option that you can go with. That's the logic behind it, but nobody uses moon cups. I don't know anyone who does anyway. I think it's kind of,
I'll take your word for
the way to go
on this matter.
Yeah, I've also got they had they had something encouraging to say about free speech on campus that I quite liked. Let's see if I can find that.
Yes. So.
Oh no, the word campus does not appear, so I don't know where I got that.
No, I think it was university. They've been very. They've stayed away from maybe a more American style.
Oh, this is going to be a bit hard to find. I'm typing with one hand.
It's all right. I can give you the. I've got the quote here. So, we'll strengthen academic freedom and free speech in universities.
Yeah, like I said, they've got to go through 15 of these. Yeah, well, you said it. I think it's whether they actually do it or how they're going to do it is questionable. But I'm impressed that they put it in there. You know, they're on the side of free speech, and at least on university campuses, they're acknowledging that something needs to be said on this matter, and that's that sentence gave me the warm fuzzies.
So maybe we should step back a second on this, because I think this is a really important point. We've had the Labour, race and faith manifesto come out, which, talks about hate speech. It talks about, there's going to be massive controls on certain things, probably not going to be very free speech orientated. Let's be honest, reading between the lines. And I think this is something that's very important to you and I in our way of thinking, and also probably to a lot of your American viewers with the First Amendment.
Yeah.
What are you saying when you say free speech? Are we saying anything goes, no hold barred, or are we saying, some objective restrictions, like threats to violence and such, but no hate speech stuff, no subjective, oh, I'm offended and therefore this is banned speech? Well, how are you defining free speech there?
Well, is that a rhetorical question? You're literally asking me.
I'm asking you, yeah.
Okay, well, it's like the spirit of my channel is that I don't really have a hard opinion on anything. I can see both sides of the argument. Like hate speech, I'm absolutely I think it's appalling. The idea that hate speech might not be covered by free speech is appalling to me. But there are reasons, like I said, threats of violence. What do they call it when it has to be a credible threat of violence?
Incitement to violence, and
shouting fire in a crowded theatre is the classic example. These are things that seem pretty unwise to me, and that you're asking for trouble if you go into these. But
so I think the line we would both probably draw is that some objective restrictions on speech may be acceptable. So as you say, shouting fire in a crowded theatre, direct incitement to violence. But we don't like those subjective limits where somebody says, oh, I feel somebody was trying to insult my religion, or I felt this was a microaggression, because it puts the power to define the rule in the head of the person who's listening to the speech, which, is unsustainable, and you just can't control that. So,
that's absolutely.
And I think this free speech debate is really important, because I think when you don't have the ability to discuss controversial topics, I think what happens is you end up ceding ground on controversial topics to, people who are more controversial. People would say Donald Trump, people would say Tommy Robinson, and people disengage when we can't discuss sensitive topics around race, around gender, around these things. And we get people going into online echo chambers, going into your 8chans and things, and not having their opinions on certain things discussed and challenged. So I really think this is a really important debate around free speech and where we draw those lines about what speech is acceptable. We seem to have had a shift recently from freedom towards more safety. So this sort of speech is violence idea, trigger warnings. I know you reviewed the coddling of the American mind. Safety seems to be the watchword, and the impact that speech can have on certain communities, rather than the freedom of people to debate controversial topics and maybe put their foot in it from time to time.
Yeah, and that brings me nicely to this other part, completely different part of the manifesto, where they're talking about the internet primarily. It looks like we will legislate to make the UK the safest place in the world to be online. Well, that to me screams,
what does safe mean is the problem here, isn't it?
I don't want the online to be safe. It's like, I want to be able to protect my identity. I don't want people to be able to find out my address and my name and phone number. That to me means safe, but still, I don't think that's what they mean. The idea that the government is going to protect me from people saying mean things about me or about my group or about women, that's absolutely detestable. Like, that's I don't like that idea of the internet. That sounds awful. I don't want to go a cute little playpen that where I'm not going to feel anything bad. I want to, I go on the internet and I look for, some of the worst stuff. And I'm a grown up, I can handle it. And I think most people in the UK can. It's infantilizing to imply that people need to feel safe online. Ridiculous, in my opinion.
I think you're exactly right. I think you summed it up really nicely. It really depends what safe means. Yeah. Right. If safe is protecting your details, we've had the Cambridge Analytica scandal is quite raw in the memory. So dealing with issues of security, keeping your private details safe, I think that's good. That safety is good.
But I think if we're talking about child pornography, I think that does seem sensible. If we can start getting smart about that. I mean, that is already illegal. So I don't know what they're going to do in that sense. But protecting children does also sound a bit like that policy that was, I don't know if it's been passed. The needing an ID, a form of ID entered online to access pornography for to prevent young people and from accessing it. That's what they're referring to.
This is what I think that's dealing with. It's dealing with their porn ban, which seemed to be ill-advised. It seemed to be easily gotten around with VPNs and these kind of things. People could just register their porn sites in the Isle of Man or whatever, and they could get around it.
Harms. So it doesn't say porn. It says unless that's under harms. I suppose it would be.
Well, I think here they're doing that thing where they're going, "Oh, won't someone think of the children?" to sort of justify, to justify potentially going further with their porn ban and things. How many kids are 6-7 years old are accidentally typing porn into their computer and realizing what's going on?
Or I'd imagine,
or intentionally. I'd imagine not too many. Do I want kids watching porn? No. Do I want it to be used as a hammer to stop adults accessing pornography or stop them saying rude things about men or women? No, I don't want that either. So again, it's this language where it suggests they might want to go a bit further than we'd be happy with. But they can, if we were to challenge them on it, they could say, "Oh, well, no, really, we just want to stop kids, child pornography being shared online or whatever." Okay, fine.
You said earlier, you said about Tommy Robinson, and I don't know if that was in reference to this idea of online radicalization that I'm seeing a lot. I mean, you can say the same thing about radical Islam, as apparently a lot of those guys get radicalized online, and they've got these forums and they've got all these cat profile pictures because Muhammad loves cats. You heard that? No, apparently, on these radicalizing forums, they all have profile pictures of cats because that's a big thing in Islam.
Anyone on Twitter who sends me something sort of vaguely divisive, if their picture isn't of that, I'm just sort of immediately like, probably not going to bother with you.
Well, anyway, it's, I actually do find it. I do wonder how much. I'm going to go off mic. Do you want to play for time?
Yeah, I can play for time. Yeah. So I guess the other thing that they mentioned was that there's going to be no place for terrorists. So if I can look into the notes here, and ensuring there's no safe space for terrorists to hide online. So again, this is a situation where nobody could really argue with that. Nobody wants terrorists to be able to, use WhatsApp, use Facebook to be able to organize terrorist attacks on the UK. But the issue here is, how is that going to be used to justify controlling certain platforms, controlling what you can say on Facebook, controlling what you can paste on Facebook, controlling who's allowed to look into what you're saying in your private messages? It's unclear. You couldn't argue with the hope of the intervention to stop terrorism, but what civil liberties it will impact on, what loss of freedom will occur, well, it's unclear how much of that they're willing to sacrifice to stop anyone discussing terrorism online. So I never know with the Conservatives. I don't think they're really a real supporter of freedom as much as I'd like them to be. But when I look at them compared to Labour, I think they at least prevaricate on these issues rather than full-scaling want to wade in on them.
Yeah, I think, as I said in a video probably up to a year ago now, I do find it disturbing that it doesn't, like, nobody is like really cares about freedom of speech. It's like something that they'll mention in relation to this, but it's not like nobody seems to think of it as a value unto itself. It's not really a talking point. I mean, it's nice that they mentioned it a couple of times in the manifesto, but it's I can't think of, like, other than your Count Dankulas and your Tommy Robinsons, I can't think of any like legitimate champions of free speech, politicians. I mean,
well, I think it ties back to what we were saying earlier, is that there's been a shift towards this sort of safety culture. The damage that can be done by speech, if it incites someone to go off and do something stupid, has been weighted so much higher than the potential downsides, the potential that we can't discuss certain issues, people become radicalized. I think it's the impacts, the pros and cons are much closer together than people are giving them credit for being. People just say, oh, this person noted in their manifesto that they listen to PewDiePie, so therefore, oh, PewDiePie is terrible. I don't think people correctly weigh up that downside with the positive of getting these people's ideas out there, debunking them, shining a light on them, getting them exposed to different ideas, and not allowing them just to kind of stew in their own ideas with people who won't challenge them in the dark corners of the internet. So there are pros and cons to shutting down speech. And to me, the pros of having more speech far outweigh the cons of having too much speech. But people will decide where they stand on that. But I think it's a debate that's important to have. And I think at the moment, people are so scared that if you say, look, ooh, Tommy Robinson speaking is a good thing, they'll just call you racist, bigot. Whereas I want him to talk, because I want the things that he says that are wrong to be debunked. I want the things that he says that are important to be discussed by probably more sensible and more moderate people than Tommy Robinson. But we can't have those debates if certain topics are just offline, and we get more radicals and more maybe not sensible people discussing these controversial topics if they're off the mainstream docket, as it were.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is a part of me, to play devil's advocate, I'm absolutely in favor of free speech. Everybody who watches this knows, but I don't really believe in that point about was it sunlight being the best disinfectant, and just letting these people get debunked by broadcasting their opinions, because the truth is that people exist in these echo chambers and bubbles, and you get it's not against the law to be an anti-vaxxer, to talk about vaccines and autism or whatever, and yet that is massively prevalent and just complete BS. It's completely unfounded in truth, and yet it's impossible to stop it. This movement, and conspiracy theories and everything. It's like these movements still exist. These people still hold these delusions, despite the fact that it's completely legal to talk about them. And there's really good. It's information out there that's really easy to access that disproves all of these.
You're never going to get 100%, are you? It's just so the argument is how many people, if Tommy Robinson goes on Newsnight, for example, and gets absolutely destroyed and looks like a fool, how many people does that say, hang on a minute, I might need to think about what I think about Muslims or whatever it is, and how many more people him appearing does that validate?
I'd like to believe that.
I don't know where that balance lies. But my sympathies are more towards people being able to speak.
Whenever there's a debate online, not online, I mean on TV, and whenever there's something being broadcast, like a debate, it can look so obvious to one side that their guy won, and then to the other side, they think their side won. It's like someone being like completely destroyed on TV can look.
Yes.
To one side, it can look like they were being unfairly maligned rather than destroyed.
No, you're completely right. What I'm saying is it's never going to work 100%, right? You're still going to have your groups who decide somebody won, regardless of all the evidence to the contrary. Look at the debate we had yesterday. I think it was Barry Gardner who was on discussing, this Trump takeover of the NHS with Andrew Neil, and half the people are saying, "Oh, Barry Gardner absolutely destroyed Andrew Neil, like so sensible, what a great person," and then half the others are going, "What have I watched here? This was another car crash for Labour, just exposed as completely lying about the NHS." And
exactly,
you just like, what are these two different sets of people watching? It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that Scott Adams says all the time about the Trump delusion syndrome, derangement syndrome. Sorry, where everybody in America is watching the same thing, but they're seeing it completely differently. They're watching two different movies, sitting in the same theater.
Oh, it's a complete. You are right. It is a Rorschach test on a lot of things.
I think we should go on this though. I just wanted to bring it up, and
I just don't know, as I said, how many more people are de-radicalized by debunking these people, as opposed to how many more people are validated. I don't know. I don't know the studies on it. My sense is that I just rather people talk.
Regardless, it's not a reason to take away people's freedom of speech. That's not. Correct. It's not my fault that some people are idiots. That you shouldn't be taking away my rights just because somebody might misinterpret my words or someone might violently because of what I said.
I remember having this exact discussion about the Christchurch Manifesto and the Christchurch shooting. So afterwards, I was people were saying, right-wing commentators, the bodies are laid at their feet. Yeah, everyone should get online and be abusing Jordan Peterson. They should be telling Ben Shapiro that he's to blame for this. And I said, hang on a minute. This is absolutely disgraceful. These are people who, I'm sure they have their issues with certain groups, but they don't advocate this. They didn't support this, and they're not responsible for this. And the idea that we can't discuss controversial topics because some nutcase might run off and interpret the words which weren't meant for that purpose and do something. I think if you're going to go down that road, there's no limiting principle to that, right? Anything that somebody says can be misinterpreted used in a certain way. It goes down the sort of hate speech alley, right? Where you fall into complete subjectivism. And I think that's a really dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, agreed. Just to highlight something before we move on, the end of this paragraph, I just noticed has the word loot boxes in it, which I think is pretty. They're pretty up to date on the.
They're getting in those buzzwords, yeah.
Not just boomers in the Conservative office, like somebody actually understands what's going on with the loot crates.
I know they've got some young guns in there. I play a lot of Destiny, and it's interesting actually. The Destiny 1 had a lot of this sort of RNG. The guns could come with different perks, and they'd be better in the game and what have you. And for the second game, for Destiny 2, they stopped that, and all the guns had these fixed roles. And what they found was the player base actually revolted. They were like, oh, we really want this random number generation. We want to have this seeking for these new guns and getting the god roll gun. So it's hard. Nobody likes this sort of pay to win mentality and people spending loads of money on games. But when they removed it in this instance, the player base revolted. So it's a really interesting debate to have.
Yeah.
Well, true. In the Destiny game, you don't pay for it. So I think this is more around the financial.
Did you want to talk, since it's just here, I thought it was interesting. They're talking about immigration in this. Kind of predictable. That's the conservative point of view. It's not really represented by any other party except for Brexit Party and a few of the sort of smaller ones. It's very much a conservative on the conservative side of the political spectrum right now about this immigration stuff. And Boris, or the manifesto, says that they're going to stop EU immigrants from getting benefits until 5 years, until they've been here for 5 years. Let's see if I can get I don't know what's said.
I think they essentially said they're going to stop the preferential treatment between EU and the rest of the world. Is that the sort of emphasis of what they were saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. Let's see what it says. The vote to leave the EU was, among other things, a vote to take back control of our borders. That's why the Conservative government would get Brexit done and then introduce a firmer, fairer Australian-based style points-based system so that we can decide who comes to the country on the basis of skills they have and the contribution they can make, not where they come from. Immigrants will contribute to the NHS and pay in before they can receive benefits. Yeah, I think that's feeding into what I was just saying, is that they're focusing on this kind of this idea that a lot of people in the UK have, this sort of feeling that immigrants are coming here because of because of the benefits we can provide, because they want to, it's what is it called, health tourism. They want to get covered on the NHS. They want to get child benefits and unemployments, and it seems like the Conservatives are directly addressing this concern that people have, that we're going to get a lot of immigrants who are going to be leeching money off the taxpayer rather than paying into the system.
So as I understand it from looking at the stats, I think it was in the Independent about 6 months ago, the immigrants are a net positive in terms of the sort of tax take rather than taking out the system. But that doesn't mean. So I think people get irritated here because there's net and then there's the principle, right? Nobody should come here who hasn't contributed, have an operation, and then just go back to wherever they came from. Now, this might be a small effect and it might not cost as much money, but as a principle, it shouldn't really be happening, right? That doesn't mean it's a big effect, but it's probably...
make an argument that it should. I'm not...
not saying... we can make an argument. We can make an argument, but people in general don't like it.
Who would say that?
Yeah. People in general don't like it, right? People in general don't like people coming here, using things that they haven't paid into and then leaving. From the stats that I've seen, it's not a massive effect. It's not something that really bothers me too much. It's not a hill I'm going to die on, but I can understand that to many reasonably minded people, that's not an acceptable thing that happens.
I'm not saying it's necessarily based on any statistical data that these people are aware of, although there might be some statistics about that, but it is...
you have to deal with the perception as much as the... yeah. And regarding the immigration, it's just because the immigrants are a net benefit, it doesn't mean that we can't have more benefit by getting the best and brightest, the people that we need to fill certain sectors. Just because the number is above zero doesn't mean that we can't make a better system that works more in our favor. As I understand it, I always find this a little bit odd. From a sort of leftist perspective, that people are happy that our health system can't be run without asset stripping doctors and nurses from other poorer countries.
Yeah.
And this is an acceptable way for us to go on. But then they'll bitch and whine, on the other hand, about colonialism and not treating other countries fairly in the past. But we run a health system that explicitly cannot survive without us, as I say, asset stripping upwardly mobile, qualified people from other countries. Surely we have to get this in order, become more efficient, and not rely on immigration. Because if everyone had our health system, then it would be unsustainable on a sort of worldwide level.
Yeah, it's a massive meme. You know, the idea that a pro-immigration meme is that we need it for the NHS, and then, like you said, the common counter argument is, well, don't those countries need these doctors and nurses? The only thing I could think of that would be a counter argument would be that the NHS and the UK are bringing out the talent and the utility of these people where they wouldn't be useful in their home country somehow. Yeah, that's.
It's always nice for that other country. It's always nice for that other country. I mean, this is what came through in those independent stats on immigration. Is it's really nice for us because the other country pays for their sort of medical being born fees and their medical fees in youth, trains them up, pays for their education, and then they sod off to us and don't claim much because they're upwardly mobile, qualified people, and then we enjoy all the benefits of that. So
that's for us,
great for me, fantastic. But I just think there's a hypocrisy there between whinging and moaning about immigration and then saying, oh, well, I love being served my morning, avocado bagel by, Romanian history graduate. Which one is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that obviously I have to say that not every immigrant that comes here is a doctor or a nurse.
No, of course.
Like you said, it's a question of the statistics are interesting because there are a lot of different kinds of immigrant. Obviously, there's people who come here, economic refugees, where they come from a very poor country, but then equally you get a lot of very rich people moving to the UK because they're Anglophiles. You get Americans moving here. You get your Russian oligarchs moving into London. You get these extremely wealthy people who want to have, who like London and they want to live here. And it's interesting to, there's definitely two different kinds of immigrant, and we usually only think about the poor kind, but there is also rich immigrants as well.
Well, what came through in those stats, another thing was that the people who come from old EU countries, which we're meaning France and Germany, people coming in who tend to be sort of bankers, tend to be management consultants, tend to be engineers, these kind of jobs really benefit us and do us a lot of good economically. And then migrants who are lower skilled coming from other areas didn't have as much of an impact, but was still a positive impact. So if we really wanted to say, look, we want the best and brightest, we could still change things. The issue I've seen over the last week is people saying, well, we need immigrants at all levels of skills because we really need people to come in and sort of be cleaners in the NHS or, work in shops or whatever it is. And again, I come back to the same issue is we're getting people in who are quite qualified to do menial tasks. It seems unsustainable long term and a little bit demeaning on some levels when you speak about it like that.
Yeah, well, it's that's definitely, when you get into that kind of argument, it's something that you start to really lose the working class vote there, because that being plasterers, builders, and cleaners, these are the jobs that the salary is being driven down because because immigrants are willing to do them, and because they don't have the same demands that a working class English person has.
It's sort of the left wing case against immigration, isn't it? I can't remember what the stats were.
Bernie Sanders was talking about exactly this like 10 years ago, before it was on PC to talk about immigrants this way.
I can't remember what the stats were on how much of an impact this is. I'd have to have a look, but this is certainly the argument that people make. That is, if you're bringing in a lot of people who are prepared to work for low wages, we had that that James Bloodworth study where he was working in sort of I think he was working in an Amazon warehouse, and these people were on minimum wage. You know, they were scared to go away from their stations to take a pee, and they were peeing in bottles and these kind of things.
Yeah.
Because they were happy for those wages. They were happy to be here. It was better than being where they'd come from.
At least their family was safe, you know?
Yeah, but essentially we were getting away with treating these people poorly because they were willing to accept lower standards.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned something interesting there, which is the minimum wage, and that is literally why the minimum wage was first invented, was to keep out immigrants. And that's and one conspiracy theory you might that I've heard floated around is that the only reason conservatives have increased the minimum wage when they've been in power, they don't believe in it for helping the working class. They increase the minimum wage because it actually disincentivizes immigrants, because the British people are willing to work as a cleaner for £10 an hour or whatever Corbyn's suggesting it should be, and they can easily hire these English speaking experienced English workers rather than having to hire immigrants. It's I don't want to go into it now, but it's a very interesting topic of part of economics, talking about the relationship between the minimum wage and immigration, and flooding the labor force with low skilled workers, or just workers who are willing to work low skilled jobs. It doesn't you can get people who were accountants in their home country who can work in Tesco quite happily in the UK. But I've really digressed now. But this
it's fine. I don't know what the stats are, but yes, it is a very interesting discussion.
The Australian style points based immigration system is something that I've heard floated about, and which is what it sounds like. It's filtering out people from jobs that we don't need. It's asking for the kind of immigrants that we think will help our country, which is thinking of immigrants as a help to us rather than a hindrance. It's sort of reframing the whole immigration picture, I think.
I don't have a problem with this approach. I know when I was in Cambridge, everyone was going, "Oh, Australia, they're so racist. Oh, it's just horrible." Like it had become sort of a buzzword that this Australian style points based system was horrendous. I can understand people in a country, wanting the best and brightest to come here to enjoy, the things we're doing here and to contribute. I don't really have strong feelings one way or the other at the moment, but I certainly don't think it's some immoral fascist takeover of the immigration system.
Yeah, I think arguably it's giving a lot of dignity back to the immigrants, saying we're not here. You're not coming here so that we can help you. You're coming here because you're a valuable human being, and we want you here. I think it's potentially a good reframing, like I say, rather than thinking of immigrants as these these helpless, lowly people who we have to bring into our fold and help them and give them free stuff.
If people are saying there's a lot of ill feeling and racism towards migrants, and there certainly is some of that. If they know they've gone through the system, they recognise that they're a skilled, educated person who's going to be an asset to our country. Maybe that'll help challenge some of those stereotypes and reduce that. We can hope that that's a benefit of it. Yeah.
Unless you have another point here, I want to move on to just. Oh dear. I don't know if you ever watched this show called Can't Pay, We Take It Away, but it's a TV show in the UK.
Is it a bailiff show?
About bailiffs who go to people's houses and tell them they've been evicted or that they owe money, and they have to enforce the law. And it's funny because I watched this show with my husband. I really enjoyed it. I really don't like reality TV, but I love this show. Oh dear. I'm trying to get this point out so that you can react to it, and I'll go off mic.
All right.
It got me thinking about the rights of landlords and how
there's a bailiff behind you. She's just rolling.
She's behind you. The thing about renting rights, the rights of people who are renting housing, the more rights you give to renters, you're taking them away from landlords, and that's why I thought it was interesting in here. I don't know what word to search for. They had a part about saying that you can't evict people with no fault evictions, I think they call it. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me over the baby. They're calling it. They're saying that landlords cannot evict their the people renting. What are they called? Tenants. You can't evict a tenant for no reason, which I think is basically taking away the landlord's property rights. So you're saying you have to rent to this person. You can't get rid of them unless they've done something wrong. You're basically saying that place doesn't really belong to you. You want to react to that while I settle down this baby?
Yeah. My first reaction was kind of the same as how you've just kind of framed it. I mean, if I own a property, surely I can decide to throw someone out if they wear the wrong colored trousers or whatever. It's my property. I'll do whatever the hell I want with it. It's not obviously it's not ideal if your landlord's not a very nice person. They just have a change of heart and decide to throw you out. But I mean, what's the principle here, that the landlord can't decide what to do with their property? It seems a slightly awkward way to go. What, are you not going to get into situations where the landlord says somebody has done something, they say they haven't, and we get into this sort of hoo-ha in the courts? I don't know how that's going to work.
I've just found it there, that part of it. It's we will bring a better deal for renters, including abolishing no-fault evictions and only requiring one lifetime deposit, which moves with the tenant. I don't really know what that means, to be honest. The lifetime deposit part sounds like it's something useful for renters who can move their deposit from one place to another. This will create.
Wouldn't the deposit be different on different properties of different value? I don't know.
This will create a fairer rental market. If you're a tenant, you will be protected from revenge evictions.
The rogue landlords.
And if you're one of the many good landlords, we will strengthen your rights of possession. We will strengthen your rights. If
I don't understand. It says we'll take away all these rights from you, but we'll strengthen your.
If you're good.
How do you define good?
Yeah, right.
I just don't like these. I don't like these value statements, like, that are open to interpretation, subjective interpretation later on. But as I said, there's a lot of that in these manifestos, because you don't want to take too hard line a stance and alienate a big group of people.
Sorry, I've just gone off mic again. Got some more squealing going on. I might have to stop prematurely.
Well, that's okay. I think we've done a fairly good walkthrough anyway, haven't we?
Yeah. Something else that gave me the apart from that renters thing, something else that warmed my cockles was the pro-business parts of the manifesto. Did you notice any of those? And do you have anything to say for a couple of seconds while I'm off mic?
I didn't get to a lot of that. What did you see in the manifesto that was particularly pro-business?
Okay, well, in the introduction, this is the part that warmed my cockles. The tragedy of the modern Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is that they detest the profit motive so viscerally and would raise taxes so wantonly that they would destroy the very basis of this country's prosperity. It's a perfect, I think that perfectly sums up Jeremy Corbyn's economic policy.
Well, I think this is known about Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, isn't it? That they're socialists. They don't like the profit motive. Fine, that's their opinion. We both do. We think it's reasonable that you make a profit for, providing services and goods that people want in a free market. If Corbyn and McDonnell want to sell the opposite to the public and they can get enough votes for it, then I guess sadly that's the way we're going to go. But yeah, you got to get in a dig at Labour, haven't they? It's a Conservative manifesto. You got to have a dig at Labour. The issue with Labour, I guess, is you've got to balance, particularly with the highest earners, with the biggest businesses. You've got to balance that ability for them to continue to make money, to want to strive to do better, to expand, against their paying more tax, contributing more to that safety net. I'm sure you could dial it up a little bit and they wouldn't all leave the country. But I think Jeremy Corbyn wants to do it quite quickly, quite harshly. And, he's prescribed a very small group, the top 5%, who are going to burden all of the cost of his proposed policies. And as Andrew Neil was saying in his interview with Corbyn, if only a small fraction of those people leave the country, his tax base crumbles and it's going to fall on everyone else.
Absolutely.
So, people say, it's an old hackneyed, sort of threat. These people won't leave the country. But when he's made it such a small group of people that will have to pay more and not sort of separated out over all of the middle class, everyone paying a little bit more, when you put it all on a small group, you really are risking that, I guess, more so than you would be if you moved towards a sort of more Scandinavian or German system where everyone was paying a bit more. So if Corbs gets in, we'll have to see how that plays out. The Russian families I work with might be on the first plane out.
Yeah, well, I hope he doesn't, as we talked about before, just for many reasons. I'm sorry, just noticed some funny comments that I'll read out before I get onto my last point, and then we'll go.
From the viewers?
Yeah, we've got the baby is making a few good points as well, but Poe keeps interrupting. And somebody else agreeing, saying the baby has free speech too.
Exactly.
Yeah, she says she's very talkative recently. I think the baby is responding to her talking could be really conducive for mental development. And there you go. We're helping my daughter's mental development and teaching her about how
she got particularly agitated when you started mentioning Corbyn, which
I actually don't think
correlation, causation, who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, what were we talking about?
We're talking about Labour not liking the profit motive and their tax base maybe collapsing.
And that does lead on to my last point, which is that I wonder if the Tory manifesto was released a few days after Labour, so they could specifically make these digs at Labour, and because they've, in a few points, they've emphasised the Conservatives as being the low tax policy, sort of economically pro business, low tax party, and who doesn't like low taxes? I mean, on its own, it's definitely a vote winner, saying, okay, well, you're going to have to pay less at the end of every month. That paycheck that you get every month is going to have more money in it for you. It's hard not to be tempting with a policy like that.
It's a really interesting point about the timing of the release of these, because again, Labour as well have had this they've had the second release of this race and faith manifesto, which is more on the social side of things.
A sequel.
So were they waiting for the Tories to say things about free speech and society and then come back with that again afterwards and try and re-steal the thunder, be the ones who are more in the public consciousness after that release and sort of get the Conservative manifesto out of the headline? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's all these sort of shadow games that go on and, high profile strategy. I heard today that Labour are supposedly entirely changing their strategy for the next 2 weeks because they're not looking too good in the polls still.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is that I don't know if it's that Andrew Neil or if it's just a coincidence, but I saw something today saying that Conservatives are up by 5% compared.
I think I sent you it yesterday on WhatsApp. I think it was the Betfair Exchange odds for a Conservative majority. I looked before and after the Andrew Neil interview, and it had changed by plus 6% for a Conservative majority. Now, I know the new modelling of the polling came out as well on the same day, I think. So I'm not sure which one it was that sort of played into it being more likely that be a Conservative majority by the best available evidence. But it certainly seemed like there might be some correlation and causation between that terrible interview with Andrew Neil and the rising likelihood of a Conservative majority. So I know Andrew Neil is quite right-leaning in his politics, so maybe he feels that's a good outcome. Although I thought the interview was pretty fair, to be honest, and I'm sure he'll rip Boris a new one when he gets a chance as well.
Yeah, did you have anything to say about that amazing Andrew Neil interview with Corbyn, or the hashtag Corbyn car crash?
Well, I just
made a good video on it, so if you want to sum up the thoughts there.
Well, I just thought it really summed up the sort of state of the discussion around the election, which is Andrew Neil asking Corbyn how he's going to pay for these things, how it's going to be sustainable. What's the way forward for Britain here? And Corbyn just saying, there was one particular clip where Andrew Neil asked him, how are you going to pay for the pension contributions for the WASPy women where the pension age had changed, and it's going to cost 60 billion. And Andrew Neil asked repeatedly, how are you going to pay for this? And all Jeremy Corbyn can say is, because it's a moral debt, we have to pay for it.
We need to pay for it.
Yeah, it was how and why. How? Yeah, why we're going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Because it's important. How are you going to pay for it? Because it's important.
Let me tell you how important it is.
It was just this weird interplay between practicality from Andrew Neil and sort of ideology and utopianism from Jeremy Corbyn, which, yes, it might be a virtuous thing that you want to do, but I don't see it as particularly virtuous to say we're going to give you a unicorn if you can't deliver the unicorn. So we'll have to see how it shakes out if Jeremy Corbyn gets into government. But it made him look very ideological and like he didn't know his numbers. You can say whatever you like, but I don't think it was a particularly strong showing for Corbyn. Having said that, if Boris goes on with Andrew Neil, as I think he should, I think it's pretty untenable for him not to do so, because all of the leaders are going on with Andrew Neil. I'm sure Andrew Neil will rip Boris a new one on some of his comments and some of the fibs he's told in the past as well. So we'll look forward to that.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly, and I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for appearing, and sorry for putting you on the spot for being live. And
no, it's all right.
I really don't know how loud the baby sounds are compared to me talking, but sorry for anybody who disturbed by that. I'll see you all soon, I hope, in upcoming videos. And Sam also has videos that come out even more regularly than mine, so go to his channel if you want to hear more about the election. I'm sure there's going to be more on that.
Yeah, if you want to pop over to Bad Boy of Science, I'd love to have you there, particularly if you disagree with my stances in the videos, and we'll have a good conversation about it.
Cool. All right, I'll